Told him before it was, I told him the other night in a concert, I said, "Oh, but honey, if you have a disagreement, don't take off here and you go that way and I'll go this way. Stick around, you'll make up."
Yeah.
For decades, religious music has moved nations, uplifting souls, healing hearts. But what if behind the voices, behind the praise, was something else? Something engineered? From megachurches to rural tent revivals, faith has become performance. And sound, a tool of control. The problem? No one ever asked who was writing the hymns, or why. Then came a voice, a woman with tambourines and fire, Vestal Goodman. Her music healed millions. But now, her silence is telling a different story. Vestal Goodman wasn't just the queen of Southern gospel. She was its mother, its martyr, and, some whispered, its prisoner. To millions of believers, her performances were sacred events. She could bring a crowd to tears with a single note, her tambourine trembling in time with a power that felt divine. But behind the sequins and smiles, behind the perfectly coiffed hair and polite amens, Vestal lived a life defined by control, codependence, and quiet compromise. Her marriage to Howard Goodman, celebrated from pulpits and press photos, was anything but simple. Howard was a showman, a businessman, a preacher, and a man whose ambition never slept. Together, they built the happy Goodman family into a gospel empire. But empires, by nature, demand loyalty, silence, sacrifice. By the 1970s, the Goodmans were raking in money through albums, tours, and TV specials. But not all of it was clean. Rumors surfaced of mishandled royalties, secret ownership of publishing rights, and financial manipulation disguised as faith. Industry insiders spoke in hushed tones about artists being strong-armed into signing away their songs. Vestal's voice helped sell the records, but Howard's hand kept the books. And that hand held more than a pen. Those close to the family began to notice bruises, emotional, financial, spiritual. Vestal's on-stage joy began to seem rehearsed. Her prayerful interludes increasingly sounded like coded cries for help. Behind the scenes, she was often isolated, silenced by the very men who'd built her up, including her own husband. And still, she smiled. Still, she sang. Because in Southern gospel, suffering wasn't just tolerated, it was sanctified. To the public, the gospel circuit was holy ground. But behind the curtains, in the green rooms and cramped dressing trailers of revival tents and church stages, darker stories circulated. Everyone in the industry knew there were two versions of Vestal, the saint and the survivor. Whispers followed her wherever she went. She's not allowed to speak to certain people. She sleeps in a separate hotel on tour. She wanted to quit last year but was told she couldn't. Nobody ever said who told her, but they all knew. Howard had become more than a husband. He was her handler. In interviews, Vestal's answers were pre-screened. Her public appearances were choreographed down to the minute. When she began to speak out about burnout and spiritual warfare, management intervened. Tours were extended. Rest was denied. One promoter remembers a chilling moment before a concert in Baton Rouge. Vestal, moments from taking the stage, sat alone with her head in her hands. "They don't care if I live or die," she whispered, to no one in particular. Then she stood up, adjusted her robe, and walked out into the spotlight with a smile that broke hearts. Fans had no idea what she carried, and she carried everything: pain, pressure, secrets. Some say the church used her image as a shield to hide financial corruption, to distract from scandals involving other gospel artists, to keep the Southern gospel machine humming along, unbothered by the cost. Because if Vestal was smiling, then surely everything was fine. Southern gospel, for all its soul and scripture, was never just about the music. It was an industry, fiercely protected, tightly controlled, and ruthlessly hierarchical. And at its heart sat a quiet cartel of managers, promoters, and patriarchs. They dictated who rose, who fell, and who stayed silent. The Goodmans, once the darlings of this world, became its brand ambassadors. But that privilege came with a price. Vestal's image, matronly, devout, indestructible, was carefully curated by men who knew the power of a godly woman, so long as she stayed in line. Behind the curtain, her voice was leveraged like capital. She was overworked, underpaid, and deeply dependent on the very machine that drained her. The church halls and gospel networks turned a blind eye to what everyone knew: that Vestal was exhausted, emotionally broken, and likely being financially exploited. Her name brought in millions. She saw a fraction. When she began to push back in the early 2000s, asking questions about royalties, declining more appearances, speaking more candidly in interviews, contracts were revised. Opportunities dried up. Even her health was weaponized. A stroke in 2003, followed by cardiac episodes, led to a campaign of whispers: "She's not well. She's too unstable to perform." Howard makes the decisions now. But the people closest to her say otherwise. They say Vestal saw something she wasn't supposed to see. A document, a will, a ledger that didn't add up. Something that shattered what little trust she had left. Not long after, she made a decision that shocked her inner circle. She began writing everything down. Journals, recordings, letters never mailed. Some of those writings, it said, disappeared the night she died. Others may have survived. And they tell a very different story than the one gospel TV ever aired. After decades of singing, "I wouldn't take nothing for my journey now," Vestal Goodman's final years suggested otherwise. Her journey had cost her more than anyone knew, and not just spiritually. Family tensions, once tightly veiled beneath televised harmonies and staged smiles, began to crack open in the early 2000s. And what spilled out wasn't praise, it was pain. Much of the tension centered around money, royalties, rights, and what Vestal believed had been siphoned from her legacy. For years, the happy Goodman family had been a touring dynasty, but beneath the surface, ownership and publishing rights were a tangled web. Vestal, despite being the group's emotional core and most recognizable voice, reportedly had little control over the finances. Multiple insiders revealed that Howard, along with a small group of close advisors, managed the contracts. When Vestal began reviewing her own financial records, something didn't add up. She started asking questions. The answers were vague. Then the backlash began. Family members distanced themselves. A nephew who once sang alongside her stopped returning calls. A niece publicly criticized her health and stability. An internal power struggle began playing out quietly, with lawyers instead of microphones. And when Vestal brought in her own accountant to audit old records from the 70s and 80s, she was allegedly told to drop it. She was like a ghost in her own home, one confidant recalled. She'd given everything to that family and ministry, and now they were acting like she didn't belong. By 2003, her performances had slowed, but the scrutiny had not. She was still under contract for multiple appearances, including a major gospel reunion tour, but she pulled out at the last minute. Officially, it was due to illness. Unofficially, she was refusing to share a stage with people she no longer trusted. At home in Tennessee, Vestal became increasingly reclusive. Friends say she spent hours listening to old tapes, reviewing legal files, even talking aloud to Howard, who, by then, was gone. Some believed she was unraveling. Others believed she was uncovering something. And then, there was the safe. a small steel lockbox hidden in the back of her personal closet. After her death, it was gone. No one ever claimed to know what was inside, but those closest to her say Vestal had started referring to it, cryptically, as the Ledger of Lies. In the attic of a modest brick house in Hendersonville, Tennessee, just outside Nashville, sat a collection that few people knew about. Not the industry, not the family, only Vestal and a handful of trusted friends. Reel-to-reel tapes, dozens of them, marked not with song titles but with dates and initials. These weren't studio sessions, they were conversations, audio letters, late-night reflections. Some dated back to the 1980s. Others were much more recent. One tape, labeled simply 1225, was recorded on Christmas Day, just weeks before Vestal's death. The content of those tapes became the subject of intense speculation almost immediately after her passing. One former Gaither associate claimed he'd heard excerpts. It wasn't just music, he said. It was a confession about money, about manipulation, about fear. Another claimed the tapes named names, label executives, gospel stars, even televangelists, describing a system of abuse and financial exploitation within the Christian music world. Vestal, it seemed, had spent her final years trying to document everything. But just as quickly as they surfaced, the tapes vanished. The home was sold, the attic cleared, the reels never seen again. Family members denied they ever existed. Others insisted the tapes were nothing more than audio diaries from a woman in decline. But for those who knew her best, it didn't add up. She wasn't paranoid, one longtime friend said. She was preparing. And if she was preparing, the question remains, for what? It was supposed to be a triumphant return. On December 27, 2003, Vestal Goodman was scheduled to appear at a small gospel tabernacle event in Celebration, Florida. It wasn't a tour stop. It wasn't televised. It was meant to be a low-key gathering. Friends, family, a few old fans. She wasn't even expected to sing, but Vestal insisted on attending. She said she had something to say, something important. She arrived looking frail, far older than her 74 years. Friends said she moved slowly, but deliberately. Her eyes, sunken, glassy, carried a weight few could interpret. She was holding a leather-bound notebook in her lap the entire time. Some say she planned to read from it that night, but she never did. Shortly before the program began, Vestal collapsed backstage. Paramedics were called. She was rushed to a local hospital, but she never regained consciousness. Hours later, she was pronounced dead of complications from influenza. The official cause, a tragic accident. Nothing more. But whispers started immediately. One attendee claimed she'd overheard Vestal arguing with someone behind the stage, a man she didn't recognize. Another said the notebook she'd been holding was missing from her lap when they found her. A third, more chilling account, she'd told a fellow performer minutes before she fell, "If anything happens, tell them to find the page marked Selah." No one ever found such a page. Her funeral, held days later, was packed with gospel royalty. Tributes poured in from across the nation. But behind the hymns and sermons, something hung in the air. Unease. Because the woman known for unwavering faith had left this world mid-sentence, and the truth she carried never made it to the pulpit. She was Vestal Goodman's granddaughter, a natural heir to gospel's greatest dynasty. Destiny Rambo McGuire had the name, the voice, and the platform to carry the legacy forward. But in August 2004, just 8 months after Vestal's sudden death, Destiny disappeared from public life. No announcements, no farewell tour, no press release. One moment, she was sharing stages with Southern gospel royalty. The next, she was gone. Fans chalked it up to grief. She and Vestal had been unusually close, bonded not just by blood, but by something deeper, something that even family members said felt otherworldly. On more than one occasion, Destiny had described her grandmother's voice as a kind of spiritual weapon, a sound that didn't just stir emotions, but shifted something unseen. Whispers followed Destiny's disappearance. Some said she'd moved to North Carolina to join a reclusive ministry. Others claimed she'd been institutionalized after a psychological breakdown. One persistent rumor insisted she had entered a convent in rural Virginia, leaving behind all music and all contact. There was only one piece of public evidence from that period, a blurry photograph taken at a roadside revival tent outside Clarksdale, Mississippi. Destiny appears gaunt. Her long hair is tied back. She's not singing. She's seated in the back row, eyes fixed on the pulpit, lips moving silently. The photo was dated November 2004. When she re-emerged in 2005, almost a full year later, she refused to explain where she'd been. But her music had changed. Gone was the traditional gospel sound. In its place, ambient harmonies, droning synths, cryptic lyrics that seemed almost coded. One track, "The Bell in the Garden," featured the line, "You told me not to dig, but I heard the ringing anyway." Critics called it a reinvention. Those who knew the family called it something else, a message. 3 years after Vestal Goodman's death, the Goodman family estate quietly changed hands. A development firm from Atlanta purchased the property without fanfare. No headlines, no bidding war, just a deed recorded, and the house left vacant. That choice nearly hid one of the most alarming discoveries in gospel history. With the house mostly empty, family members having long since relocated across Tennessee and Georgia, remodeling crews gained unrestricted access. What they uncovered in the attic stunned them. Hidden under decades of dust and old insulation lay a sealed wooden crate. No markings, no labels, nothing to indicate its purpose. The real estate agents assumed it contained tour memorabilia, vinyls, posters, even T-shirts, the kind of promotional archive gospel legends often possess. But when they pried it open, they found something unexpected. Dozens of manila folders, each stamped with a name. Some belonged to recognized gospel figures. Others were obscure artists who never found the spotlight. Inside each folder was not merchandise, but personal records, receipts, travel itineraries, hand-annotated contracts. Many were unmistakably tied to publishing rights and royalty agreements. It was the final item, though, that altered everything. Beneath the last folder rested a single handwritten letter. The address was sparse. To the one who finally looks. Signed simply, VG, the initials pointed unmistakably to Vestal Goodman. Dated November 2003, just 6 weeks before she collapsed backstage and died, the letter was chilling in its clarity and confessional tone. In it, she described what she called a pattern of theft and deception masquerading as ministry. She accused unnamed individuals associated with the publishing and promotion structures of gospel music of suppressing her journals and manipulating her approval of contracts. She claimed pressure had been mounted to sign away publishing rights, rights that belonged, she believed, to the artists themselves. The letter also referenced a collection of recordings that prove what we all denied. Vestal urged the recipient not to surrender these recordings, not to capitulate under threats. It concluded with a final, cryptic admonition. They want the voice, not the truth. Do not give them either. The chilling nature of the letter transformed the entire archive from a curiosity into something far more significant. The crate, which contained tangible records of cash flow and contractual agreements, now appeared to be Vestal's attempted safeguard, an encoded legacy meant to expose the corruption she believed had been orchestrated in her name. The following day, family representatives arrived at the estate. Without explanation, the crate vanished. Real estate staff were told not to speak to journalists. Remodelers were quickly moved off the property. The development firm issued a standard statement: property development, nothing more. One assistant, however, refused to remain silent. She had scanned the Vestal letter before handing it over, making a backup copy. That scanned letter, complete with her signature, now circulates in private gospel archival circles, shared among collectors like forbidden scripture. Since then, no family or public figure associated with the Goodmans has addressed the letter or its claims. Contracts and publishing documents that might confirm or refute the allegations have remained sealed. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Did Vestal Goodman develop evidence of financial exploitation within the gospel industry? Was she trying to correct a legacy of control? Her own voice leveraged at the expense of truth? Or was this simply the paranoia of an aging performer estranged from her family and her craft? Collectors and historians who have reviewed the scanned letter describe it as a credible, deeply personal confession. Its tone is not the language of hysteria. It's precise, measured, urgent. Even more unsettling, the date, November 2003, aligns with the period just before she insisted on attending that final tabernacle event in Florida, carrying a leather-bound notebook and appearing to confront someone, right before she vanished from performance and died. In the years since, those who study gospel history have searched for corroboration: discarded labelings, missing signatures from ministry partners, unaccounted royalty ledgers. Some have suggested that publishing contracts were quietly rewritten shortly after Vestal's collapse. Others believe certain artists who signed during the Goodman era later clashed over royalties. The crate's contents, they say, held the only traces of that transaction history. But because the crate, and possibly tapes referred to in her letter, were removed, the full story remains buried. Vestal Goodman's final message was suppressed. Her final confession effectively disappeared behind locked doors. And yet, that letter circulates still, quietly, discreetly, symbolizing the truth her voice tried to sustain. Because Vestal Goodman didn't just sing about heaven, she tried to expose what was happening on earth. And in the silence after the crate disappeared, that warning still resonates. In early 2006, shortly after a brief reappearance in Southern gospel circles, Destiny Rambo vanished again, this time seemingly by design. Rumors began to trickle out that she had entered a remote retreat center in the Appalachian Mountains, affiliated with a secretive charismatic sect known only for extreme fasting, intentional silence, and spiritual deliverance rites. The facility, referred to internally by members as the Rocking Chair, had no web presence, no public address, and refused contact with outsiders. A former attendee who asked to remain anonymous described Destiny's arrival. She came unannounced, and she looked unwell, trembling, exhausted. She reportedly remained silent for days. When she finally spoke, her words were fragmented, scriptural snippets laced with cryptic phrases that didn't match any familiar text. She kept saying, "The sound opened the door. The wrong sound," the source recalled. Destiny stayed at the center for nearly 5 months. During that time, reports say that the sect's spiritual leader warned her against writing music altogether, claiming that the spirit behind the sound had transferred with her from her grandmother Vestal Goodman's legacy. He allegedly insisted she burn her lyrics and private journals in a solemn ritual under a moonless sky. That night, multiple witnesses say, she destroyed stacks of her writing. Their contents remain unknown, whether confessions, warnings, or something far darker. When Destiny re-entered public life in 2007, Her demeanor had shifted. She looked healthier, but startlingly distant. Her voice, once soaring and melodic, had grown lower, slower, less performative and more incantatory. In rare interviews, she never directly acknowledged what happened at the retreat center, only stating that period was when she learned to listen to silence. Her first post-retreat album, Midnight Mercy, reflected this change, a meditation in darkness. Its closing track, a song titled Room with No Door, became emblematic of her transformation. The refrain paints a haunting image. She wrote it in the wall, the hymn you're not supposed to sing. The song has never been performed live. Destiny refused stage invitations, citing spiritual fatigue. Instead, she slipped further into the shadows, choosing to let her lyrics and their unspoken messages resonate from the silence. Critics called Midnight Mercy a bold reinvention. Gospel fans saw it as a descent. But industry insiders and friends claim it was a statement, a coded message that Vestal Goodman's final warnings and suppressed writings had followed Destiny, haunting her until she could no longer ignore them. Some insiders believe Room with No Door was her confession and her defense. That the hymn she referenced, the one you're not supposed to sing, was not just metaphorical, but literal, a dangerous composition her grandmother had buried, one that had unsettled legacy and power. They suspect Destiny's unexplained disappearance and her subsequent silence were part of a larger attempt to protect or adapt that truth in a world still unwilling to hear it. Destiny's withdrawal from the gospel scene mirrors her grandmother's patterns: isolation, cryptic messages, and layers of concealment. But Vestal's disappearance from the stage felt imposed. Destiny's seemed chosen, and that difference matters. Destiny didn't flee. She prepared. She burned. She waited. She returned changed, and her music became less about faith and more about warning. Some say the hymn that triggered this ordeal, the suppressed final song, hidden scores, and lost recordings, might still exist. Others think parts may survive in fragments, verse echoes in old tapes, ledger markings in family journals, or undiscovered writings from Vestal's lost ledgers. But Destiny won't say. She only offers silence and lyrics that tremble at the very edge of disclosure. The legacy of Vestal Goodman and her granddaughter Destiny isn't contained in gospel tracts or Christian networks anymore. It drifts in the embers of burned poetry, in songs never sung, in silence that echoes longer than memory. And whether Room with No Door remains a cryptic rebuke or a spiritual seal, it's clear. Some hymns were never meant to be heard, and some warnings follow us long after the voice is gone. There was one final hymn, an invisible composition, never sung, never recorded, and now lost to time. Those closest to Vestal Goodman insist she wrote it during her final weeks, describing it as a spiritual exorcism, something too dangerous to ever share. She kept the sheet music folded inside her Bible, hidden among prayer cards and sermon notes. When Vestal died, the song vanished as well. Some believe it was burned. Others say it was buried with her. There are no lyrics, no melody, only a title, The Key of Enoch. That title appeared once, in faded pencil, scribbled in the back of an old tour program discovered years later in a used bookstore. And from that single phrase, an entire mystery grew. Scholars and devotees alike have been attempting to reconstruct the hymn ever since. Musicologists have scoured every live tape and broadcast performance, particularly focusing on a 1979 manifestation of God Walks the Dark Hills. One researcher, while painstakingly analyzing frequency patterns, claimed to have detected something astonishing. A second voice, faintly layered beneath Vestal's vocal, pitch bending, harmonic, almost imperceptible. It was a melody that no microphone should have captured. Not part of the live mix, nor buried in overdubs, but an organ-like resonance that trailed her own voice as if encoded into the very performance. That led to new lines of inquiry, encoded messages, hidden scales, spiritual mathematics embedded in tempo shifts and vocal inflections. Some theorists propose that Vestal was experimenting with acoustic architecture, trying to harness sound frequencies that resonate with spiritual perception. Others believe she was composing something like a sonic seal, a hymn that, when sung, would shatter illusions or set free suppressed truths. But no one has ever found the full song. No piano sketch, no lyric sheet, no voice memo, nothing. Not even fragments. Some believe the pages were torn from her Bible. Some think they were quietly removed by those who feared the content. Others say she destroyed the only copies, believing the world wasn't ready. And here's where the question becomes existential. What was she trying to warn us about? Did the Key of Enoch reference ancient rites, coded prophecies, or something that revealed corruption behind the gospel stage? Was it a spiritual weapon, not metaphorically, but literally, intended to pierce deception? The rumor mill has drawn lines between Vestal's fight over royalties, her journals describing hidden contracts, and a sudden, deadly illness just weeks after preparing to speak in Florida. Some whisper that her collapse was not natural, that she was silenced before she could sing that final hymn publicly. Vestal's collapse was officially attributed to complications from flu, but the suddenness has fueled speculation for decades. Who took her notebook? Where was the page marked Selah that Vestal reportedly asked someone to find if she couldn't speak? In the years since, gospel collectors and archivists have examined every vestige of Vestal's performances. In churches, in radio recordings, in bootleg videos, nothing. And perhaps that's the point. The song wasn't meant to be found. It was meant to guard something, or deliver something, hidden beneath ordinary melodies, suppressed under the weight of fame and control. Those who knew Vestal say she was quietly rewriting her music ministry in her last days, that she began writing journals, filling reels with monologues, collecting documents and correspondence, that she wasn't afraid of legacy. She feared the lie. She wanted truth recorded. She debated exposing agreements that bound other artists, publishing contracts that she claimed were more gospel than contract. She grew even more reclusive, prompting speculation about her mental decline. But some insiders argue she wasn't unraveling, she was unearthing. Some believe fragments of the Key of Enoch may still exist, under house renovations, hidden in attics, locked in briefcases, or buried in safes. Maybe someone holds an old draft or a wax cylinder recording. Maybe Vestal gifted a copy to someone she trusted, who then hoodwinked or hidden for safety. And if the hymn is ever reconstructed, what would it mean? Would it expose financial manipulation in gospel publishing? Would it reveal names of powerful figures, contracts signed in secrecy, stories suppressed by spiritual branding? Or perhaps the hymn was a spiritual declaration, something meant to dismantle a machine built on voices and conformity, using sound itself as the key. Because Vestal Goodman didn't just sing about heaven, she was trying to warn us about something else. Not empire, not performance, not even faith, without accountability. And in the silence that followed her final note, that warning still lingers. What if the hymn we were never meant to hear is already playing? Now that the truth has surfaced, we face a choice. Do we silence it again, or finally listen, before the echoes disappear for good? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.